Today we're going to be talking about echinoderms. So phylum Echinodermata is the latest group that we're covering. You're probably familiar with several members of this group. Up on the top left of the screen you have a sea star, commonly called a starfish. I will try to avoid calling it a starfish, but I'll probably make a mistake and jump into that. We try to avoid using that name because it can be confusing. A lot of people will hear starfish and think, oh, that means it's a fish. That happens with a lot of names. Jellyfish, same thing. We call those jellies. So try to call these sea stars. The brittle star is on the right bottom corner. Little spindly arms. Kind of weird looking. Looks kind of like a sea star. Sea cucumber, not pictured. Sea urchin in the center of the screen, bottom. That's that spiny little guy crawling on a rock. Sand dollars, you might be familiar with sand dollars if you've ever been to like a beach store. They often sell those as little trinkets, bleached white, kind of a round shell, and what's inside of it usually has some kind of a story with it. Sometimes they'll say if you break them open, you can release the doves that are inside. It's actually some bony structures that are inside the body of the sand dollar that will come out when you break them open. And sea lilies, we'll see some pictures of those as well. Alright, so within this group, echinoderms, we're going to talk about the name. The name echinoderm, you probably can figure out part of this. The derm part means skin. Echino means spiny, so they're known for having spiny skin. That's not common amongst all members of the group, but in general, that's a characteristic that you can remember about phylum Echinodermata. There are 5 general characteristics of most echinoderms. So most echinoderms will have the following features. Spiny skin, so little bumps or spikes that stick out of them. An endoskeleton, unlike what we saw with arthropods where they have a skeleton on the outside of the body. These guys have a skeleton that is inside of them, so they have some internal support. They have, in general, a 5-part body. We saw in sponges they were asymmetrical. Then we saw in cnidarians that they were radially symmetrical. And then we transitioned to a lot of different animals that were bilateral. This group is kind of a throwback. We're going back to a radial body plan. We'll talk about that a little bit more, and we'll see kind of some strangeness with its body plan as it grows and develops. But in general, you'll usually see 5 points sticking out of the body, or be able to note 5 repetitions in structure in an echinoderm. This is not true in all echinoderms. There are some sea stars that have many more than 5 arms, and we'll see some of those as well. They have a water vascular system. So in addition to having an internal skeleton, they still have a water vascular system that allows them to kind of push and extend and move certain parts of their body. That's kind of important to their function. And they have these cool things called tube feet. The tube feet are basically little water-filled suction cups. So they can expand by pumping them full of water. They can contract by pulling the water back out of them. And when they do that, they will form the little suction cup surface and stick to whatever they're on. The internal skeleton of an echinoderm is made up of bony plates. There are little overlapping plates that are in the skin of the sea star. One of our dissections is supposed to be looking at a sea star, so if you get to look at the internal surface of the skin, and you can even see parts of it sticking out, you'll see these little bony plates that kind of overlap, and connected to those little bony plates are sometimes little calcium spines that stick out. The echinoderm's water vascular system is a system of tubes that can carry water, food, oxygen, and remove wastes, and help them move. So, kind of like the internet is a system of tubes, there's tubes running throughout the entire body of the sea star. You can see some of that in the picture. They have a little opening at the top. It's not a wide open hole. It's basically like a filter that will allow water to get pulled into the ring that runs around the central part of the body of the sea star. And then it goes out through canals that run out the length of each arm, and that connects to all of the little bulbs that are pushing water out to the tube feet to allow them to move. So where do these guys fit into our evolutionary classification, and how do we address this group on its own when we're breaking it down? So we're covering them a little bit late in the semester because they actually share some relationships with some of the bilateral organisms that we've been studying, so they don't fit in back with cnidarians, even though they have some radial symmetry. And if you look on this diagram, you'll see like the third bar in on the cladogram is the crinoids. Crinoids are kind of plant-like looking organisms, and they are just outside of our classification for what we're going to study in here. We're going to spend most of our time looking at Asteroidea, the first branch off of Eleutherozoa. That's your sea stars. Ophiuridae, which are the brittle stars, that's the next branch. Echinoidea are the sea urchins, and Holothuridae, I think I said that right, are the sea cucumbers. So we're going to talk about those guys as well. So sea lilies, I will spend a little bit of time letting you look at some of these sea lilies. The crinoids are that group that was kind of maybe the out group of the section we're covering in here. Sometimes they're called sea lilies, feather stars, but it's class Crinoidea. These are arguably the earliest echinoderms, certainly the earliest echinoderms we're studying in here. They have somewhere between 5 and 200 arms, but they always seem to be in groups of 5, so it'll be some number times 5 of arms. Most of them are nocturnal filter feeders, as you could probably guess by looking at those feathery arms sticking out of them. They are picking up loose particles of food from the water. Another nice picture of one. They look a lot like the feather duster worms that we saw earlier.
Feather stars and sea lilies, with their delicate fringed arms, look like exotic underwater flowers. For many years, researchers only saw fossilized remains of crinoids like these, and thought these beautiful animals were extinct. Then, in 1864, researchers using a deep-sea trawl net retrieved a living sea lily. Now, using MBARI's remotely operated vehicles, we're able to capture beautiful high-definition video of these mysterious creatures. After analyzing ROV video recordings, we found that crinoids are among the most abundant animals observed on seamounts near Monterey Bay, and they're also very abundant in Monterey Canyon. Using our ROVs, we've also been able to observe different crinoid behaviors, including their techniques for feeding on plankton as it floats past them in the current. Modern-day crinoids have two distinct forms: sea lilies and feather stars. Sea lilies are anchored to rocks on the seafloor by long stalks. Feather stars, on the other hand, are free to roam. They crawl along the ocean floor or swim by bending their arms back and forth in powerful strokes, which lets them quickly avoid predators. Most often, we observe them holding onto rocks with their finger-like cirri. Nearly 600 crinoid species have been identified in the deep sea, and researchers are still discovering new species. In fact, MBARI scientists collected a new species at Pioneer Seamount, just north of Monterey Bay, in 2003. For the Monterey Bay Aquarium, I'm Ken Peterson.
Alright, so moving on to sea urchins. That's that spiny guy at the top left. This is class Echinoidea. Sea urchins and sand dollars both fall into this group. Sea urchins have longer and sharper spines that they use to protect themselves. You probably don't want to go pick one of these guys up. You will get poked by the spines. Some sea urchins have poisonous spines, so you touch them, you can actually get poison on you from them. Sea urchins have a mouth that is typically hidden underneath the body. So you'll see them crawling along rocks, and underneath that, if you were to pick one up, you would see underneath the mouth. They have 5 teeth, which they use to eat sea plants. So again, following this theme of 5 parts, 5 teeth. Sea urchin is not very active. Sometimes they move slowly using tube feet, and when they're not moving, they'll use the tube feet to kind of stick to the ocean floor. Basically, these guys are kelp grazers. They'll sit and eat kelp, plant in one spot, and just chew apart the branches of the kelp. This is some footage that I got or I made of a West Indian sea egg, Trypnoestes ventricosus. I think I'm saying that correctly. And you can actually see the 5-parted mouth in there underneath the bottom. This one's actually using its 2 feet to stick to the glass in the aquarium, and so you could see its mouth. Now I did a time-lapse video because if you were watching that, you'd see that mouth moving very slowly. So I did a time-lapse video. I probably sat there for a couple of minutes and got that brief video. This is a long-spined urchin, Diadema antillarum. Another example that I got some video of. It's a little bit longer video. I sat here for about 5 minutes on this one so that you could see its 5-pointed mouth. Alright, sand dollars. Sand dollars, usually you see them in trinket shops and you don't get to see them swimming around. So this is some footage of a sand dollar moving around on the sand. If you ever find them on the beach, you will often see these guys washed up on the shore, and people will collect them and try to preserve them. Notice it's not white. It has a layer of tissue growing over that white endoskeleton. What you can do to check to see if the one that you picked up is still alive, because you don't want to collect a live specimen, is put a little bit of muddy water or a little sand grit on your finger and rub it on that outer edge surface or underneath it, and if you see movement, you can kind of see that kind of flickering movement around the edges, you've got one that's still alive. Put it back on the sand or into the water. If you find one and there's no movement, usually they'll get bleached out if they die and stay washed up on the shore. Maybe you could collect one then. I have a few that I've collected very carefully, but they are living animals, so we don't want to abuse them and pick them up when they are alive. Don't ever collect the live ones. You can actually get in trouble for that, but you can usually find these on the beach of Georgia's coast. Sea cucumber. This is class Holothuroidea, sea cucumbers and sea pigs. Their mouth is surrounded by tentacles that grab up sand and organic matter. Sea cucumbers have a mouth on their leading end, so they move into the world with their mouth facing forward. You can see the branching tentacles in that diagram to give you kind of the idea of where those go. The mouth is surrounded by the tentacles. They will have tube feet that are along the edges of the body. And notice that they do have a complete digestive system. They do have an anus at the other end, and this is true of all the echinoderms. And if you look, the tube feet look like they're in rows around the length of the body. And this is a clue to the relationship of this animal to the rest of the members of this group. If you had to guess, how many rows of feet would you say that they had around the edge of the body? If you guessed 5, you're correct. What we seem to see here is a transition from a 5-pointed star animal, like a sea star. Imagine my fingers are the points of the sea star. And if we look at something like an urchin, what seems to have happened is that the urchin's arms in evolutionary history had curled back, shortened, and made into a ball. So normally the sea star, with its arms extended, has a mouth on the bottom surface. This would be the oral surface, and the surface you see on top is the aboral surface. So a sea urchin takes that body plan, collapses it into a ball, and the mouth is still at the bottom, and you still have 5 rows of tube feet going up around the edges, and you've got the spine sticking out. And what we see with a sea cucumber is that same body plan is turned on its side and then stretched out. So you still have the mouth at one end, and you still have 5 rows of tube feet running around the length of the body.